us this week. I'm Malinda Frevert.
And I'm Sam Ausdemore.
And this is the first edition of the Bold Report, a new weekly vlog that we're going to be doing about politics in Nebraska and around the country that applies to Nebraskans. So the big thing this week was the President's State of the Union. What do you think, Sam?
A lot of the pundits were right when they said that the president was going to try and frame his new proposals under the term investment rather than more spending. And I think he had a great rationale behind this. He brought up the Sputnik moment for our parents and their parents, and he tried to make the point that as America's falling behind, we need a lot more investments on the part of the federal government in order to keep the United States competitive. And I thought this was a really good tactic to take if we weren't burdened by the already large federal deficit, which was the point that the Republicans hooked on in their response to the president's speech. It represents an interesting phenomenon in that the Republicans now have this 1-2 punch combination. They have the insider, Paul Ryan, that can get things done inside the Beltway, and then the outsider, Michelle Bachmann, that can channel the, I don't want to say you can channel the public's outrage, but you have that outsider mentality in that Tea Party group where you start there and then you get the insider.
But the appeal of Paul Ryan was that he's not really a party insider. Even people in his own party don't necessarily like him. He proposed, what was it, the roadmap for America, where he talked about cutting Medicare and Medicaid and slashing Social Security and pushing it into private, markets. And so, I mean, even in his own party, people are stepping back a little bit and haven't fully embraced him. So I thought that was one of the reasons for picking him, was that he wasn't a hardline insider like a John Boehner or a Mitch McConnell. But the big thing is the riots in Egypt right now, and that could be a big tipping point in the Middle East.
Exactly. I think what you're seeing here is another one of the, I don't want to sound too anti-imperialist, but the United States has a history of propping up unpopular dictators in the interest of ensuring stability in a region. And I think this is coming to a head where you have a not very popular president in Mubarak, if I'm saying that right, who by all accounts is running a very oppressive regime.
And the Obama administration is towing a very thin line. Like you said, the U.S. has supported Mubarak just because he's been a stable figure, even if not necessarily popular, and so now they have to balance the people's cries for a more democratic regime with the fact that they've been providing some sort of, I don't know if support's the right word, but they have been, they have been playing games, or they have been playing ball with Mubarak, and haven't been disengaged with him or cutting him off. So it's going to be a fine line moving forward.
Yeah, it's going to be something.
On Thursday, there was a big immigration rally that had over 400 people there to protest Senator Charlie Jansen's bill that would introduce Arizona-style immigration legislation in Nebraska.
First, when it comes to immigration, I think this would be a very, very bad thing to introduce in the state of Nebraska, because not only does it present obvious legal challenges when it comes to racial profiling, but also when it comes to possibly alienating the Hispanic population in Nebraska.
I think the big argument against immigration is fiscal policy. You can't, when the state's facing a potential $1 billion budget shortfall, instituting a bill that's cost Arizona millions of dollars in lost revenue because of boycotts. They're now fighting a legal battle, which is by no means cheap. And you alienate a population that is an economic backbone for this community. It's very, very dangerous path to start down. The big issue facing Omaha this week was the recall. Everything wrapped up there, and Jim Settle squeaked by, and he actually won, I believe, by the same number of, pretty much the same number of votes that he won the 2008 election in. So that was kind of, I'm from Omaha, and so as someone who grew up in the Big O, I would find it very frustrating if I still lived there that I had to spend $250,000 to $300,000 on an election just to prove that people were pretty much in the same positions that they were in 2008.
Although even though the election is settled, I understand it's not without controversy in that fact. There's quite a few, there were friends of Mayor Settle that were in the paper for questionable conduct around the election.
Yeah, it was definitely, I think it ended up being a bit of a messy race towards the finish on both sides. You had the pro-recall side, who was kind of sitting on their laurels and coasting and just thought the petition drive would get them, the votes that they needed. And so they weren't pushing out a get out the vote campaign. And then you had the anti-recallers who were you know, there was some weird stuff going on with Suttle's office, and then I think the homeless busing thing was a big turnoff to a lot of people who might have turned out otherwise, just because whether or not they supported the mayor, they just didn't think the city needed the big shakeup. And then you had certain other political figures who were hinting about running for mayor while also running fundraising for pro-recall groups, and so it seemed more to be like a drama between political personalities and people who were still caught in 2008 and rather not focused on moving the city forward through a tough budget crisis. Brenda Council introduced LB 200 back at the beginning of the legislative session, and it would provide funding to research healthy food access for people in the state. Particularly, the issue is food deserts, which is when there's no sort of healthy food grocery store or farmer's market or anything within several miles of a populated area. So
what reminds me about this is we always think of Nebraska as an ag-based state, so you don't think that finding a healthy meal would be that hard in a state based so heavily on agriculture, but especially in rural areas where the population base might not be enough to support a grocery store, or in a lot of the urban areas where it might not be there might not be the demand there, or there might not be the opportunity to open a business. I think this is going to be something really, really important, especially when it comes to the push from First Lady Michelle Obama to improve. I know school lunches were a big part of hers, but just healthy food in general.
Right. And then the final thing we talked about was the new Nebraska News Service.
Yeah, this was a really interesting article we came across in the Daily Nebraskan, which is the daily University of Nebraska-Lincoln newspaper. And what it is, in a nutshell, and I believe I read this right, in that journalism students at the university would be taking a course in how to cover news stories. And then they would go down to the Capitol and they'd be able to publish these in a sort of wire service that would be then made available to other news outlets for free or very little cost. This would be great because especially for the smaller market newspapers, I know that the Norfolk Daily News is one-sided in the story that they're not a big enough publication to send a full-time reporter down to the Capitol, whereas that's generally reserved for only the AP. I think the Omaha World Herald has a full-time coverage, maybe even the Journal Star.
The Journal Star does too.
But this is just a great opportunity not only for students to get involved in government, but also in critiquing government. Also, it's a way for those smaller newspapers to get access to stories that may help. That's been the Week in Review, and also a look ahead at what's coming up this week. For Malinda Frevert, I'm Sam Ausdemore, and we'll hope to see you again next week.
Thanks.